The sun was setting over the city skyline as Michael "Big Shaq" Williams walked out of the glass doors of Wilson Tower. He loosened his tie a bit and checked his watch. 6:30 p.m. The business meeting had gone well. 3 investors had shown real interest in his new community center project. Shaq smiled to himself, still sometimes surprised by how far he'd come from the tough neighborhood where he grew up. He decided to walk back to his car instead of calling his driver. These quiet moments alone helped him think. The streets were busy with people heading home from work, the usual mix of suits and casual clothes hurrying past him. Shaq nodded politely at those who recognized him. Being a successful businessman and motivational speaker in the city meant people often knew his face. As he turned the corner onto Martin Street, Shaq slowed down. This part of downtown had changed since he was last here. There were more people sleeping rough, huddled in doorways or sitting on flattened cardboard boxes. The homeless shelter had a small crowd gathered outside, waiting for the evening meal service to begin. Shaq felt that familiar tug in his chest, the urge to help that drove most of his charity work. He reached for his wallet, thinking he'd make a donation to the shelter. That's when he saw him. At first, Shaq wasn't sure. The man was thin, much thinner than he remembered. His gray beard was untrimmed, his clothes worn and dirty. But something about the way he sat, slightly apart from the others, reading a tattered paperback book even in the fading light, it was so familiar. "Mr. Peterson," Shaq called out before he could stop himself. The older man looked up, squinting slightly. There was no recognition in his eyes, just the cautious look of someone used to being bothered on the streets. Shaq stepped closer. "Mr. Peterson, it's me, Michael Williams, from East Side High." The man's eyes widened slightly. He closed his book and looked more carefully at Shaq's face. "Michael? Little Michael from my calculus class." Shaq laughed softly. "Not so little anymore, sir." Mr. Peterson stood up slowly, his movements stiff. He was wearing layers of clothes despite the mild evening, a faded flannel shirt over a t-shirt and an old jacket that hung from his shoulders. Up close, Shaq could see how much his former teacher had aged. The man who once commanded a classroom with energy and passion now looked beaten down by life. "Look at you," Mr. Peterson said, his voice raspy but warm. "All grown up in that fancy suit. You did all right for yourself, didn't you?" "I had good teachers," Shaq replied, still trying to process what he was seeing. The man who had pushed him to excel in math, who had stayed after school to help him prepare for college entrance exams, who had written him glowing recommendation letters, was homeless. People walked past them on the busy street, some glancing curiously at the well-dressed businessman talking to a homeless man. Shaq didn't notice them. His mind was racing with questions. "Sir, what? How did you?" Shaq struggled to find the right words. Mr. Peterson waved his hand dismissively. "Life happens, Michael. Not worth getting into on a street corner." But Shaq couldn't just walk away. Not from the man who had changed the course of his life. "Have you eaten today? There's a diner just down the block. Please, let me buy you dinner." Mr. Peterson hesitated, pride flickering across his weathered face. For a moment, Shaq thought he might refuse. Then his former teacher nodded slowly. "I suppose I could eat," he said quietly, tucking his book into a worn backpack that contained what looked like all his possessions. As they walked side by side toward the diner, Shaq in his $3,000 suit and Mr. Peterson in his threadbare clothes, Shaq felt a strange mix of emotions. Shock at seeing his respected teacher in such conditions. Gratitude for all this man had done for him years ago. And something else, a growing certainty that their paths had crossed again for a reason. What Shaq didn't know then, as he held the diner door open for his former teacher, was that this chance meeting would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine. The diner was warm and smelled of coffee and grilled onions. A bell jingled as Shaq held the door open for Mr. Peterson. The waitress glanced up, her eyes lingering a moment too long on Mr. Peterson's worn clothes before she smiled professionally and led them to a booth by the window. "Order whatever you want," Shaq said, passing the laminated menu to his former teacher. He noticed how Mr. Peterson's hands trembled slightly as he took it. Mr. Peterson studied the menu carefully, like someone who didn't get to make choices often anymore. "Just coffee and maybe some eggs," he finally said, his voice quiet. "Come on, sir. The burgers here are amazing. And they do a great apple pie, Shaq encouraged him. After some gentle persuasion, Mr. Peterson agreed to a proper meal. As they waited for their food, an awkward silence settled between them. How do you ask your former teacher why he's living on the streets? Shaq wondered. But he didn't have to ask. Perhaps it was the warmth of the diner or the respect Shaq showed him, but Mr. Peterson began to talk. You're wondering how I ended up like this, he said, wrapping his bony fingers around the coffee mug for warmth. Shaq nodded, not trusting himself to speak. It wasn't one big thing. It was lots of small things, one after another. Mr. Peterson took a sip of coffee, closing his eyes briefly at the simple pleasure of it. My wife, Linda, got sick about 5 years ago. Cancer. The doctors said it was treatable, but the treatments were expensive, really expensive. The waitress brought their food. A large burger and fries for each of them. Mr. Peterson stared at his plate like he couldn't quite believe it was for him. We had savings, he continued after taking a small bite. And insurance. But it wasn't enough. The copays, the experimental treatments we tried when the standard ones didn't work, it all added up. I took out a second mortgage on the house. Shaq listened, his own food forgotten. The diner buzzed with conversation and the clanking of cutlery around them, but at their table there was just Mr. Peterson's quiet voice telling a story that was heartbreakingly common. Linda fought hard, for 3 years, but in the end, Mr. Peterson's voice cracked. He put down his burger and wiped his mouth with a napkin, taking a moment to compose himself. After she passed, I tried to keep going. I was still teaching then. The kids kept me sane, you know. But I wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating right, started making mistakes. What happened with the school? Shaq asked gently. Budget cuts. They offered early retirement packages and my principal suggested I take one. Said I needed time to grieve properly. He shook his head. Maybe he was right, but without my salary, I couldn't keep up with the mortgage payments. And then the bank that held my pension investments collapsed in that big financial mess last year. Mr. Peterson took another bite of his burger, chewing thoughtfully. It's amazing how quickly it all falls apart once it starts. The house went first. I stayed with a friend for a while, but you can only crash on someone's couch for so long before you wear out your welcome, especially when you're a depressed old man. The waitress refilled their coffee cups. Outside, the streetlights had come on, casting a yellow glow on the sidewalk. I've been on the streets for about 8 months now, Mr. Peterson said matter-of-factly. The shelter helps when they have space. Some nights I find a quiet corner in the bus station. It's not so bad in summer, but winter. He trailed off, his eyes distant. Shaq felt a knot in his throat. This man had once stood confidently at the front of a classroom, challenging students to think, to dream, to reach their potential. Now he was grateful for a warm meal and a place to sit. What about other teachers from school? Former colleagues? Shaq asked. Mr. Peterson shrugged. Pride is a funny thing. I didn't tell anyone how bad it was getting. By the time I had nowhere to go, I was too ashamed to reach out. Figured I'd find my way back on my feet somehow. He gave a small, sad smile. Still working on that part. As Shaq watched his former teacher eat, he felt something shift inside him. A decision forming. Mr. Peterson had once changed the course of his life. Maybe now it was time to return the favor. After they finished eating, Shaq paid the bill and they stepped outside into the cool evening air. The streets were quieter now. Shaq checked his phone. 3 missed calls from his assistant and several messages he should probably answer. But they could wait. Let me drive you somewhere, Shaq offered. The shelter or? Mr. Peterson shook his head. The shelter's full tonight. I checked earlier. He adjusted the strap of his one backpack. I know a quiet spot near the library. It's safe enough. Shaq couldn't bear the thought of his former teacher sleeping outdoors. Mr. Peterson, I have a guest room. It's yours if you want it. Just for tonight, no strings attached. A look of pride crossed the older man's face. I appreciate that, Michael, but I'm not looking for charity. It's not charity, Shaq said firmly. It's a thank you. Mr. Peterson looked confused. A thank you? For what? They started walking slowly down the street, no particular destination in mind. The question hung in the air between them. You really don't know, do you? Shaq finally said. You have no idea what you did for me. Cars passed by. A street musician played guitar on the corner. Life continued around them as Shaq gathered his thoughts. When I was 16, nobody expected anything from me, he began. My neighborhood, my background, people had already decided what kind of man I'd become. Even some of my other teachers had written me off. Mr. Peterson listened quietly as they walked. But not you, Shaq continued. That first day in your class, when I got that quiz back with a B+, and you wrote you can do better on it, I was so mad. He chuckled at the memory. I thought you were just another teacher trying to make me feel bad. I remember that quiz, Mr. Peterson said softly. You'd made a simple calculation error, but your approach to the problem was brilliant, creative. They stopped at a street corner, waiting for the light to change. The next week I got an A, just to prove I could, Shaq said. And you moved my seat to the front row. Started giving me harder problems than everyone else. Because you were bored with the regular work, Mr. Peterson replied. Bored students become troublemakers. Shaq nodded. Then you signed me up for that math competition without even asking me. Remember how angry I was? The older man smiled slightly. You told me you weren't going to waste your Saturday with a bunch of nerds. But I went, Shaq said, and I placed third in the city. You could have won if you practiced more, Mr. Peterson said, the teacher in him coming through. The light changed, and they crossed the street. Neither spoke for a moment, both lost in memories. You know what really changed everything for me? Shaq finally said. That day you drove me to look at colleges. Mom couldn't get time off work, and I was going to skip it. But you showed up at my house that Saturday morning. It was just a drive, Mr. Peterson shrugged. It was more than that, Shaq insisted. On that drive, you talked to me about the future like it was real. Like I had options. Nobody had ever done that before. They reached a small park and sat down on a bench. Above them, stars were just becoming visible in the darkening sky. Those college visits led to my scholarship, Shaq continued. That led to my business degree, my first job, my company. Everything I have now started with you believing I could be more than what everyone expected. Mr. Peterson looked down at his worn shoes. I just did my job, Michael. No, Shaq said firmly. Most teachers would have seen a kid from my neighborhood making decent grades and thought that was good enough. You pushed me when I needed pushing and supported me when I needed support. You wrote those recommendation letters that got me scholarships. You called me out when I started skipping class senior year. A cool breeze rustled the leaves above them. In the distance, a siren wailed briefly, then faded. So when I say the guest room isn't charity, I mean it, Shaq said quietly. I know you. There's a direct line from who I was then to who I am now, and you're a big part of that line. Mr. Peterson looked up, his eyes shining in the dim light of the street lamp. The proud man who had been reluctant to accept help now seemed to be seeing things differently. Just for tonight, he finally said. Shaq nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It was a small first step, but an important one. Just for tonight, he agreed, knowing in his heart it would be much more than that. Shaq's driver looked surprised when he pulled up to find his boss with a disheveled older man, but he didn't say a word. The drive to Shaq's downtown apartment was quiet. Mr. Peterson stared out the window at the passing city lights, his reflection ghostly in the tinted glass. Nice car, he finally said, running his hand over the leather seat. Shaq smiled. Company car. But yeah, it's comfortable. When they arrived at the building, the doorman rushed to open the car door, faltering only slightly when he saw Mr. Peterson. Shaq gave him a look that said, everything's fine, and the doorman nodded respectfully. The elevator ride to the 18th floor felt longer than usual. Shaq noticed Mr. Peterson breathing deeply, like someone trying to stay calm in an unfamiliar situation. You okay? Shaq asked. Mr. Peterson nodded. Just been a while since I've been in a place like this. He paused. Feels strange. Shaq's apartment was spacious and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city skyline. Nothing too flashy, but definitely the home of someone successful. Mr. Peterson stood awkwardly in the entryway, as if afraid to touch anything. The guest room is this way, Shaq said, leading him down a hallway. Bathroom's right next door. Towels are in the cabinet. Use whatever you need. The guest room was simple but comfortable. A queen-sized bed with crisp white sheets, a dresser, and a small desk by the window. Mr. Peterson set his backpack down carefully on the chair. There should be some spare clothes in the dresser, Shaq said. My cousin stays here sometimes. He's bigger than you, but his stuff might work for tonight. This is very kind, Michael, Mr. Peterson said, his voice barely above a whisper. Get some rest, Shaq replied. We'll figure things out in the morning. That night, Shaq couldn't sleep. He sat in his living room with a notepad, making lists, thinking through options. Around 3 a.m., he heard the shower running. An hour later, soft footsteps in the hallway, then the guest room door closing again. Mr. Peterson was likely just as restless as he was. Morning came with the smell of coffee. Shaq found Mr. Peterson in the kitchen, freshly showered and wearing borrowed clothes that hung loosely on his thin frame. He'd found the coffee maker and figured out how to use it. Hope you don't mind, he said, gesturing to the coffee. Old habits? Not at all. Shaq grabbed 2 mugs from the cabinet. You used to always have coffee in class. That blue mug with the chemistry joke on it. Mr. Peterson smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. E equals MC2 energy equals milk times coffee squared. The familiar joke seemed to relax him a bit. They sat at the kitchen island, sipping their coffee in comfortable silence. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. I've been thinking, Shaq finally said. I have a small apartment in West Side. It's nothing fancy, just an investment property. It's empty right now between tenants. He took a breath. It's yours if you want it. For 6 months, no rent, just a place to get back on your feet. Mr. Peterson set down his mug carefully. Michael, please hear me out, Shaq continued. This isn't charity. Think of it as a consulting fee. Consulting? Mr. Peterson raised an eyebrow. My foundation runs educational programs for kids from neighborhoods like mine. We could use someone with your experience to look over our curriculum, maybe do some tutoring eventually. Shaq had stayed up half the night figuring out how to offer help in a way that preserved the older man's dignity. Mr. Peterson stared into his coffee. I don't know, Michael. It's a lot to accept. 6 months, Shaq repeated. That's all I'm asking. Give yourself 6 months to get back on your feet. If you still want to walk away after that, I won't stop you. The silence stretched between them. Outside, the city was fully awake now, traffic noises floating up from the streets below. Why are you doing this? Mr. Peterson finally asked. Shaq leaned forward. Because someone once taught me that potential doesn't mean anything unless you have the opportunity to use it. He pushed a small envelope across the counter. The keys are in there. The address too. The place is furnished, nothing special, but everything works. Mr. Peterson's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the envelope. 6 months, he said quietly, and I'll help with your foundation. Shaq nodded, relief washing over him. It was a start. And Michael? Mr. Peterson added, looking up with damp eyes. Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me. Not just what you've been through, Shaq finished for him, but who you still are. 3 weeks passed quickly. Shaq drove Mr. Peterson to the West Side apartment that first day, helped him settle in, and made sure the fridge was stocked. The place wasn't fancy, just a 1-bedroom with basic furniture and a small balcony overlooking a neighborhood park, but it was clean, safe, and most importantly, it was a real home. Shaq visited every few days, sometimes bringing takeout, other times just stopping by to check in. At first, the conversations were awkward, both men still adjusting to their new relationship. They weren't teacher and student anymore, but they weren't quite friends yet either. On this particular evening, Shaq noticed something different when he knocked on the door. Mr. Peterson answered wearing a fresh haircut and a button-up shirt that actually fit him. The apartment smelled like cooking, not just reheated food, but something made from scratch. Hope you're hungry, Mr. Peterson said, leading Shaq to the small kitchen table. Nothing special, just pasta with vegetables, but I thought it was time I did the cooking for once. Shaq sat down, pleasantly surprised. Smells great. You look good too. Mr. Peterson shrugged as he served the food. Found a decent barber down the street. Reasonable prices. He hesitated. Used some of that advance you gave me for consulting. The advance had been Shaq's way of making sure Mr. Peterson had spending money without it feeling like a handout. They both knew it was a thin disguise for help, but it preserved the older man's dignity. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The pasta was simple but good, clearly made by someone who knew their way around a kitchen. "I've been thinking," Shaq finally said, twirling pasta around his fork, "about our foundation's after-school program." Mr. Peterson looked up. "The one you mentioned before? For helping kids with math and science?" Shaq nodded. "We've got about 30 kids right now, ages 12 to 16. Most of them are behind grade level, not because they're not smart, but because the system's failed them." "Sounds familiar," Mr. Peterson said quietly. "The thing is," Shaq continued, "our current instructor is leaving, moving to another state for family reasons." This wasn't exactly true. Shaq had spoken to the instructor yesterday and offered to double her salary if she'd agree to move to their other location. She'd happily accepted. "We need someone who really knows how to reach these kids, someone who's seen potential in tough places before." Mr. Peterson set down his fork. "You're not suggesting?" "Just part-time at first," Shaq said quickly. 3 afternoons a week. See if it's a good fit." The older man looked away, out the small window over the sink. "Michael, I appreciate the thought, but I haven't been in a classroom in over a year. And after everything, I'm not the same teacher I was." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Shaq replied. "These kids don't need someone who just knows the material. They need someone who understands struggle. Someone who's been knocked down but got back up." Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the windows. The apartment felt cozy, a shelter from the storm. "I'm not sure I'm the right person," Mr. Peterson said, his voice barely audible over the rain. Shaq leaned forward. "When I was a kid, you saw something in me that nobody else did, including myself. These kids need that same thing, someone who really sees them." Mr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up, walked to a small desk in the corner, and returned with a notebook. He opened it, revealing pages of neat handwriting. "I've been working on some ideas," he admitted. "Ways to teach algebra using real-world problems. Budgeting, planning, even some basic business concepts." He turned a page. "And here, a project about architecture and geometry. Kids could design their own community centers, calculate materials needed." His voice had changed as he spoke, growing stronger, more animated. The teacher was still there, hidden beneath layers of hardship but very much alive. Shaq smiled. "The program starts next Monday. Just come and observe first if you want. No pressure." Mr. Peterson closed the notebook carefully, like it contained something precious. "Maybe I'll do that," he said. Then, more firmly, "Yes. I'll come on Monday." As they finished their meal, the rain outside grew heavier. But inside, something new was taking root, not just a job opportunity, but purpose. And for someone who had lost everything, finding purpose again was the first real step toward healing. Shaq didn't plan on sharing the story. It wasn't about publicity or making himself look good. But one evening, after a fundraising event for his foundation, a local reporter cornered him with questions about his newest program. "We heard you hired someone with an unusual background," the reporter said, notebook in hand. "A formerly homeless math teacher. That's an interesting choice." Shaq hesitated. He was protective of Mr. Peterson, who had been working with the kids for nearly 2 months now. The program was going better than anyone expected. The children connected with him in a way they hadn't with previous teachers. "Sometimes the best teachers are those who faced real struggles," Shaq finally said, choosing his words carefully. "Our new instructor has both classroom experience and life experience. The kids respect that." He thought that would be the end of it, but 3 days later, a small article appeared in the local paper and quickly spread online. "Local businessman gives second chance to homeless former teacher." The story included few details. Shaq had been careful, but enough for people to piece things together. By that afternoon, calls were coming into the foundation office. Former students of Mr. Peterson wanted to know if it was really him. Was he okay? How could they help? Shaq's assistant handed him a stack of phone messages at the end of the day. "There's something you should see," she said, pulling up a social media page on her phone. Someone had created a group called Mr. Peterson's Students. It already had over 200 members. The comments section was filled with stories. "Mr. P helped me pass calculus when everyone else said I couldn't do it. He stayed after school for 6 weeks straight to work with me. When my mom got sick and I had to miss school for 2 weeks, Mr. Peterson came to my house with assignments and taught me what I missed on his own time. I was going to drop out senior year. Mr. P found out and took me to visit 3 colleges in one weekend. Showed me what I could have if I stuck it out. I'm now finishing my degree because of him. Shaq scrolled through dozens of similar stories, a lump forming in his throat. This was bigger than he'd realized. The next morning, he drove to the community center where Mr. Peterson taught. Class wouldn't start for another hour, but he knew the older man always arrived early to prepare. "Have you seen this?" Shaq asked, showing him the social media group. Mr. Peterson put on his reading glasses and stared at the phone screen. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the comments. "I don't understand," he whispered. "These students, some of them were in my class 15 years ago. You made an impact," Shaq said simply. "And now they want to help." Over the next week, former students began appearing at the community center. A woman who now worked at a health clinic offered free medical checkups for Mr. Peterson and all the kids in the program. A man who owned a clothing store brought new clothes that actually fit Mr. Peterson properly. 2 former students who had become teachers themselves volunteered to help expand the program to more students. One rainy Tuesday, Mr. Peterson was teaching a group of teenagers how to use math to calculate profit margins for a small business. The door opened and a middle-aged man in a suit stepped in quietly, taking a seat at the back of the room. Mr. Peterson glanced up briefly but continued his lesson. After class, the man approached. "Mr. Peterson, I'm David Wilson. Class of 2003. I'm a bank manager now." They shook hands, Mr. Peterson trying to place the face with the name. "David, you sat by the window. Always asking questions about real-world applications." David smiled, surprised to be remembered. "That's right. Look, I heard what happened, and I have a proposal. Our bank has a financial literacy program for students. We need someone who can explain complex concepts simply. The position includes full benefits, health insurance, retirement plan, the works." Mr. Peterson blinked rapidly, clearly overwhelmed. I don't know what to say." "Said you'll think about it," David replied. "We need someone like you." Later that day, Shaq found Mr. Peterson sitting quietly in the empty classroom, staring at a business card in his hands. "Everything okay?" Shaq asked. Mr. Peterson looked up, his eyes shining. "I spent my life trying to make a difference. I never knew if I actually did." He held up the card. "Turns out I did." 1 year to the day after Shaq had spotted Mr. Peterson outside that homeless shelter, he stood in the back of a crowded community center decorated with balloons and a banner reading "Happy Birthday, Mr. P." The room buzzed with conversation and laughter as about 50 people mingled, eating cake and sharing stories. Mr. Peterson sat at a table near the front, looking healthier than Shaq had seen him in months. His cheeks had filled out, and the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a spark of joy. He wore a new sweater and khaki pants, nothing fancy, but clean and fitting properly, a far cry from the layered, worn clothes Shaq had found him in a year ago. "He has no idea, does he?" asked a voice beside Shaq. It was David, the former student who had offered Mr. Peterson the job at the bank. Shaq shook his head. "None. He thinks this is just a birthday party." In truth, it was much more. After accepting the position at the bank, Mr. Peterson had thrived. He worked 3 days a week teaching financial literacy to high school students and spent the other 2 days at Shaq's foundation, mentoring kids who struggled with math. He'd moved into a small but comfortable apartment of his own, refusing Shaq's offer to help with the rent. "I need to do this myself," he'd insisted, and Shaq had respected his decision. But tonight wasn't just about celebrating Mr. Peterson's birthday or his remarkable turnaround. Shaq had been planning something bigger for months. As the crowd settled down, Shaq made his way to the front of the room. He tapped a spoon against his glass, and the room gradually fell silent. "For those who don't know me, I'm Michael Williams," he began. "Though most of you probably know me as that kid who always argued in class." Laughter rippled through the room. Mr. Peterson shook his head, smiling. "You asked good questions," he called out. "I questioned everything," Shaq replied with a grin. "And you answered with patience, every time." He looked around the room at the gathered faces, former students from across 3 decades, colleagues from the school where Mr. Peterson had taught, new friends from the foundation. A year ago, I ran into Mr. Peterson by chance, Shaq continued, his voice growing more serious. Life had dealt him some tough blows. But what amazed me wasn't just his situation, it was his dignity, his unwillingness to give up. He paused. And then something even more amazing happened. When word got out about Mr. P, you all showed up. Every one of you had a story about how he changed your life. Murmurs of agreement filled the room. A woman wiped away tears in the second row. So today, yes, we're celebrating his birthday. But we're also here to announce something new. Shaq gestured for David to join him at the front. David stepped forward, holding an envelope. Mr. Peterson, when you started at the bank, you told me your dream was to create a scholarship fund someday. For kids like us, the ones who need a little extra help, a little extra belief. Mr. Peterson nodded, looking confused. Someday, yes. Well, David said, handing him the envelope, someday is today. With slightly trembling hands, Mr. Peterson opened the envelope and pulled out a document. His eyes widened as he read. This isn't possible, he whispered. Oh, it's very possible, Shaq said. Everyone in this room contributed, plus some corporate matching funds and a healthy starter donation from my foundation. Mr. Peterson looked up, visibly overwhelmed. The Peterson Educational Fund. Shaq nodded. Starting this fall, 2 students from Eastside High will receive full scholarships to State College. The only requirement is that they need to have shown improvement and dedication, not just natural talent. The committee thought that was fitting, given who it's named after. The room erupted in applause. Someone started a chant of Mr. P, that quickly caught on. Mr. Peterson stood slowly, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. When the noise died down, he cleared his throat. I don't have the words, he said simply. When I was at my lowest point, I thought my life's work meant nothing. I thought I'd failed. He looked around the room. I was wrong. As people lined up to hug him and share more stories, Shaq stepped back, watching the scene unfold. A chance encounter on a street corner had led to this moment, a teacher reclaiming not just his life, but his legacy. After a while, Mr. Peterson made his way over to Shaq. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then the older man embraced him tightly. You didn't just save my life, Michael, he whispered. You reminded me why I lived it in the first place. And in that moment, the circle was complete. The student had become the teacher, showing that sometimes the greatest lesson of all is remembering our power to change one another's lives for good.